All right, CMMC structure and levels overview. We're going to talk a little bit about more for levels 1, level 2, and level 3. You'll hear these terms thrown out, and we're going to explain what we mean when we're saying that. You'll also hear concepts of practices or controls and objectives, which is a really key point. I will make sure to labor as I have this conversation on a weekly basis with new CMMC pursuers. And it's a great point of challenge for those who don't know what they're doing and maybe the hill that is to climb with CMMC. Assessment types, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Typically, it's going to be either a combination of virtual and on-prem, or one or the other, depending on the scope and the network of the organization being assessed. We'll also talk a little bit about self-assessment versus C3PAO assessments. So level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is very foundational. It is a very small set of controls and objectives. Level 2, compared to level 1, is quite the significant leap or jump. And then level 3 has everything that's required in level 2, along with some additional requirements from a different document, NIST 800-172, that have been handpicked for level 3. So let's unpack this a little bit more. So CMMC level 1 is only self-attestation. There is no CMMC level 1 certification. There is no formalized CMMC level 1 audit, unless DIBCAC were to want to do something like that. For the average company in the industry, level 1, self-attestation, and it's the same thing that it has always been of submitting a score in the SPRS system. And this is specifically for FCI data. There are, in the realm of CMMC, two main types of data, FCI and CUI. So if a company is only processing, storing, or transmitting FCI, then most likely, unless there's other issues, which can happen, then they're only going to need this level 1 self-attestation. And this is something that has to be negotiated business to business and contracts and so on. 15 controls, 59 objectives. So quite a step down from level 2 requirements, which have a multiplied amount of assessment objectives to be implemented. This is required by the FAR clause. This is also conducted by the OSA or OSC. So the organization that is implementing CMMC level 1, they get to self-attest for their cybersecurity compliance requirements. Now, the reason that this has been decided that way is because FCI is just nowhere near as sensitive as controlled unclassified information. And so they have decided to implement this risk-based approach where level 1 does not require the same auditing stringency as level 2 or level 3. POA&Ms are not permitted at level 1. And affirmation requirements is the same SPRS entry on a yearly basis by your company's affirming official. So level 2, self-attestation. This is every company's hope and dream. This is what companies are crossing their fingers about. I just have to be so clear, this is estimated to impact only close to 5% or less of contracts, not businesses, of contracts. So if you're a business that you have 3 contracts or 10 contracts, and only one of them is for level 2 self-attestation, and the others are for level 2, your business is still going to need a C3PAO assessment. So unless you are a very rare case scenario, this isn't something that you should bank on. However, it is the same level of implementation as a non-self-attestation level 2. So for CMMC, 110 controls, 320 assessment objectives. This is based directly out of NIST SP 800-171A, revision 2. So revision 3 was published in the past year or so, finalized, but the way CMMC has been rolled out is to use the existing NIST SP 800-171 revision 2 and not revision 3. Revision 3 is coming, and there is a day where laws will change and rulemaking will happen, and the CMMC program will be revised to be based on SP 800-171 Rev 3. That will be a 40+% increase in assessment objectives. We'll talk about that some other time, but that's something to keep an eye out for. But be aware that for this year and the next year or so ahead, we'll see, it's revision 2. Assessment requirements, this is conducted by OSAs every 3 years. And this is also entered into the SPRS scoring system. The CMMC status is valid for 3 years. POA&Ms at level 2 are allowed, and there's a lot of rules and requirements associated with POA&Ms. So POA&Ms are not what most companies are historically familiar with. Historically, POA&Ms were a get out of jail free card, an endless hall pass. That is not what POA&Ms are under CMMC. POA&Ms are to be closed out within a 6-month time frame or 180 days. And there's such a thing as a CMMC conditional certification that you can get where you pass everything except for some select 1-pointers out of the 1, 3, and 5-point CMMC controls. And then those POA&Ms in association with that conditional CMMC certification have to be closed out with a follow-up assessment, which we'll talk more about later. Affirmation requirements, just like level 1. Level 2 requires affirmation after each assessment and then annually thereafter. If the affirming official, the business, is not giving that yearly self-attestation, at some point you officially do cross over into non-compliance. So that's a small, simple thing that needs to be on people's calendars to make sure to do. And of course, a compliance program, it should be an active living thing that is maintained on a regular basis. Level 2 for non-self-attestation, or C3 PAOs, a certified third-party assessment organization, is a huge chunk of what the Defense Industrial Base is going to be classified under. This is the one to really be paying attention to. We'll talk more at a later time about types of controlled and classified information and what might classify. The short answer is anything defense related or in the technical realm of things is going to be classified as needing a C3 PAO assessment. So look for this in your contracts, your flow down requirements. This is just as self-attestation, the same 110 controls, 320 assessment objectives based off of NIST 800-171. The assessment requirements is also conducted every 3 years. However, this is not self-attestation. This is by a C3 PAO. And then this is entered into CMMC for the EMAS system with the SPRS scoring. From the date of the initial C3 PAO assessment, it is valid for 3 years. So if your company, for example, has to implement POA&Ms, it's not the date that you close the POA&Ms out that your certification is valid for. It's from the date of the original CMMC assessment by a C3 PO, and then you have those 6 months for POA&Ms to close out those 1-pointers. That's something we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the fine details of how that goes about in assessments. And there's a lot of subjectivity, unfortunately. So we'll give you some tips and tricks for how to prep for assessments. And if you are planning to use POA&Ms with the nuanced rules surrounding those, what best strategies are for those. Valid for 3 years from the original assessment date before the closeout of those POA&Ms. So you'll get that conditional certification. It's from that date. You have those 3 years. Affirmation requirements. This is done on a yearly basis, and it's entered into SPRS. And if you don't do this, of course, that certification would lapse, and we don't want that. CMMC at level 3, this is the most stringent or strict cybersecurity requirements that we find in the CMMC program at this point. CMMC at level 3 is assessed by DIBCAC. There are some changes with asset categorization that you have to be aware of if you're planning or your business is planning to go for CMMC level 3. Your level 2 UID must match the level 3 UID, and you can't have CRMAs when you transition to level 3. If I just spoke a bunch of gobbledygook, we'll talk more about that at a future time and explain more of those details. So level 3 is a step up. There are additional requirements that have been selected from NIST SP 800-172. Assessment requirements, of course, the prerequisite CMMC certification from a C3 PAO, and then this is conducted at level 3 by DIBCAC every 3 years. This is entered into EMAS. The certification is valid for 3 years from the CMMC status date. POA&Ms, just like level 2 at level 3, are permitted for specific one-pointers, and these have to be closed out within 180 days. And they're valid for 3 years from the conditional CMMC status or certification date. Affirmation requirements also yearly, and the certification will lapse if not performed. And the level 2 C3PAO affirmation must also be completed. So keep an eye out for those. This will be for more specialized projects that require this higher level of security and sensitivity for that type of data. So it's not something that is going to apply to a large percentage of the defense industrial base. It'll be more for a specialized subset as they interact with the most sensitive types of QE that are out there. This slide, I cannot stress enough how important this is. This is a look at controls and objectives. So CMMC controls, there are at level 2, for example, 110. And so many companies think there's 110 things that they need to implement or do or plan for or document or provide evidence for, and that is not correct. CMMC, to use level 2 as an example, it is graded by and implemented at the assessment objective level. So some controls have a singular assessment objective, and some controls maybe have 7 or 10 assessment objectives. So there's a lot of margin between the control and the objective for specific controls. So here's a look. Level 1, the controls to objectives, level 2, and level 3. So as you can see here with this chart, there's a significant gap. You have to plan to do this based on NIST SP 800-171 alpha or at the assessment objective level, so you make sure not to miss the finer details of what the control summary is actually talking about, which you can only find at the assessment objective level. Types of data protected. So what is FCI or federal contract information? Information not intended for public release that is provided by or generated for the government under a contract to develop or deliver a product or service to the government, excluding information provided by the government to the public, such as that on public websites, or simple transactional information, such as that necessary to process payments. Controlled unclassified information, or CUI, is information the government creates or possesses, that an entity creates or possesses for or on behalf of the government, that a law, regulation, or government-wide policy requires or permits an agency to handle using safeguarding or dissemination controls. And information on specific CUI categories and subcategories can be found on the DoD CUI registry website or in the NARA archives and records. A little bit about CMMC 1.0 versus 2.0. I know that CyberAB has requested for us not to use this language, but there is some confusion out there in the industry as CMMC has gone through multiple revisions. If anyone is running around trying to tell you CMMC that has 5 levels, please don't listen to them. That hasn't been true for many years. CMMC 2.0, or the current version that we are in as of the recording of this, has 3 levels in contrast to the original 5. CMMC assessment requirements, as it used to be, potentially at level 1 required a certification while they were still working out the kinks. As it stands, CMMC or level 1, it does not require a C3PAO assessment or audit to attest to level 1. Alignment with standards. 2.0 relies on established standards, so NIST SP 800-171. As it continues to evolve, CMMC evolves with it. Plan of action and milestones. Again, historically, these were extended out with egregious, crazy long dates into, the late 2000s, 2099, or silly things like that. POA&Ms cannot be extended that way anymore. POA&Ms have to be closed out within 6 months of the conditional certification that is received for companies that need to or plan to utilize POA&Ms in their certification process. CMMC also does include the possibility for waivers. If you ever hear anyone on the government side that works that email inbox, they say it is bone dry and has been that way for years. And also for many contracts, you've been, or your company potentially has been, attesting to full implementation without any issues for many years. So that waiver, I'm sure for many companies, could be a legal concern, and these CMMC specific waivers would be processed and decided upon by the acting DoD CIO. If those are not applied, then you have to implement whatever CMMC level just like everyone else. So unless you have a letter from the DoD CIO stating exactly why you don't have to implement certain things in a certain way that you're going to present during an assessment, you should plan to fully implement NIST 800-171, although everyone's been saying that that has been done for over 10 years. So we'll leave that there. Process maturity is removed. It's a simple met, not applicable, or inherited for each assessment objective. Conclusions. CMMC has 3 levels. Level 1 being the most basic foundational cyber hygiene practices and applying to just about every defense industrial based company. CMMC Level 2, especially for the C3PO certification, is going to apply to the majority of the defense industrial base with DFARS flow down requirements from primes to subs and subs to more of their subcontractors. CMMC Level 3 will be for a select specific subset of the defense industrial base that deal with the most sensitive types of control unclassified information, or in accordance with the most sensitive types of military projects that are being worked on, or intellectual property. Data protected, FCI, and QE, or federal contract information, and controlled unclassified information.